Now that temperatures are cooling down, it's time to put those small containers back to work in my garden. In today's video, I'll share my best container gardening tips and plant out new containers. We'll also refresh the old containers and get them ready for the upcoming season. I'm Angela from Growing in the Garden. My garden is in Mesa, Arizona in Zone 9B. I love sharing garden inspiration and helpful tips so you can be successful in your garden too. Gardening in containers is a simple way to get started gardening or to add more space to your garden. It does have some challenges because the container naturally limits the size of the roots. So it's important to use the largest containers you can for growing your plants. Planting in the right size container will give your plants access to all the soil and nutrients that they need. I have a handy guide on my website that shows exactly what size different crops need. If you grow a plant in too small of a container, those roots are going to get root bound. They're going to start circling that container looking for more soil and nutrients. So it's important to give them the right size container from the beginning. Gardening in containers means that you can garden in just about anything. I have a lot of different styles of pots here, but there's one thing that's really important. It must have holes. If there's no drainage, that means the water is going to be stuck in the bottom of that container, and that's when you get things like root rot or that foul-smelling soil, and we do not want that. I love using these galvanized steel tubs as containers, but they don't have holes, so it's important to add them. I use my drill, put several all the way around. You don't want to just have one or two in the middle because they make it clogged. If you find your plants aren't growing well in the container, it may be because it's clogged with water, so check your drainage. I use these small containers during the cooler months, and when it gets hot, I put them away. So when you get out your containers, if they haven't been used in a while, give them a good clean. Use a wire brush, clean things off, make sure there's no debris. The nice thing about containers is that you can put them wherever you want. Choose a location that gets plenty of sunlight. Especially during the cooler months, your plants need lots of sunlight to grow well. When you're filling up containers, it is important to fill them all the way up with soil. Don't put any rocks or filler or anything else at the bottom of the pot. You want your plants to have access to as much soil as possible. I use the raised bed mix from Arizona Worm Farm in all of my raised beds and containers. It is the perfect mix. I used to mix my own, but I love that the Worm Farm sources quality ingredients, makes the best compost, and mixes it for me. Regular clay soil is much too heavy for pots, and it won't provide the drainage and air that the plant's roots need. Watering containers can be tricky, but my favorite way to water containers is by using these Oyas. It is a terracotta vessel that's empty. You fill it up with water, put it in the container. The water seeps out through the terracotta pot and provides moisture at the plant's roots right where it's needed. So Oyas are going to provide consistent, even watering for your plants. It's going to keep them from drying out, especially during the hottest months of the year. If you live in a place that freezes, you'll want to put these Oyas away during the coldest months of the year. But here in the low desert, my Oyas are fine outside year-round. You want to fill your containers all the way up with soil. Use all of the room in that container for your plants. Plants' roots are naturally limited when they're grown in a container anyway, so you want to give them as much soil as possible. Once these containers are full of soil, they can be heavy, so make sure that you put them in place before you fill them up with soil. In the same way that the Oyas are porous and allow moisture to seep through, these terracotta pots allow those roots to breathe. But that also means they're going to dry out faster. So you'll need to keep an eye on that. I gardened in this over the summer. It grew well, but that soil level has gone down. When I'm trying to decide whether or not I need to replace the soil in a container that's already been used, I'll just use my hands and kind of dig in the soil and see how much soil is left. If it's mostly roots and not a lot of soil, then that means it needs to be replaced because you want to make sure that you're giving your plants lots of soil. In this case, it looks like there's plenty of soil, some roots, but not too bad. So all I'm going to do is fill this back up with soil. If there were a lot of roots in here, then I would probably dump this out and put it in my compost or use it as mulch on one of my trees. So you definitely don't have to use an Oya in your containers. There's lots of different ways to water. Using Oyas gives me the most flexibility because I can put the pots anywhere that I want them, and there's no drip lines or anything heading to the pots. When you're gardening in containers, it's a good idea to add a little bit of fertilizer and work it into the soil. I like to use organic fertilizer. This is going to help the soil, help the plants. Because you're watering the containers and that water is flushing out, you're going to lose more nutrients than you would when you're gardening in the ground or in raised beds. Follow the package directions. More is not better. Especially with containers, it's better to fertilize a little bit more often than a lot all at once. My next step will be to fill up these Oyas and get this soil nice and wet so I'm ready to plant. So a lot of problems in the garden can be traced back to incorrect watering. They're too much or not enough. One of the easiest ways to tell if your plant needs water is just to stick your fingers in the soil. And if there's still moisture in there, that soil's gonna stick to your fingers. I love adding flowers to this part of my garden. There are so many flowers that grow really well in containers. I have some of my favorites that I plant every year. One favorite is chamomile. This one little plant from a tiny seed is going to develop into a beautiful plant with beautiful blooms. So I started this indoors from seed. I'm gonna put this chamomile in this one container and just let it fill the whole thing. So when you're planting in containers, it's tempting to overplant, just like anywhere. But it's important to note the mature spacing guidelines and then follow those so that your plant has enough room to grow and thrive. Statice is another favorite flower with beautiful blooms. Base statice blooms 12 to 18 inches apart. Ranunculus are one of my favorite spring blooming flowers. They grow really well in containers. So I've had these corms soaking for the last couple of hours. They've gotten nice and plump. They're ready to plant. So when you're looking for corms, try and get corms that are nice and large. That really does make a difference. You want to plant ranunculus corms about 6 inches apart. If you look at each corm, these little octopus-like tentacles, you want to face those down and the plant's going to grow up through there. And then cover it up with soil. Before you know it, those will be sprouting up and be so beautiful in the spring. This little pot, I'm going to add 1 yarrow. This is a summer berries yarrow. Beautiful pink flowers. Just put that right in there. All the different types of flowers attract different types of pollinators, so it's important to have a variety in your garden. See, I'm gonna add this scabiosa here. These plants all look so small now, but they're gonna grow nice and tall and large. So give them plenty of room. And when you're looking for transplants, it's actually best to look for ones that haven't bloomed yet. You want to look for small, tight, compact transplants. It's going to let them grow and adjust to your garden. Starflower mixed in here too. All right, I think it's time to add some more ranunculus. I'm going to add 4 more ranunculus. Ranunculus blooms are so beautiful, it's hard to imagine that they start out looking like this. Ranunculus is one of those flowers that does not mind cool temperatures. So here in the low desert, I plant in the fall and then I'm going to get some early spring blooms. You can also plant in early spring and you're going to get some later spring blooms. They won't last as long, but they will be so beautiful. Sweet peas have the most incredible fragrance, so I always add them to several areas of my garden, but it's important for them to have something to climb because they grow really tall. If you're adding a trellis, it's best to put it in place when you plant so you don't disturb the roots of the plant. I usually plant sweet peas from seed, but I found these starts at a local nursery. A lot of times when plants have multiples like that, I'll tear them apart, but sweet peas can be kind of temperamental. Don't like their roots disturbed, so I'll keep an eye on these. And then once they start to take off, I'll thin that down to 1 plant, so each plant can climb up the corner of this trellis. Lobelia is another favorite, and I've had best luck with buying transplants of lobelia. They're easy to find, and I love these bright blooms. So I'm gonna add 1 lobelia plant to this smaller container. So you wanna make sure and wait to plant it until it's nice and cool, and don't let it dry out. So when you're getting the transplants out, just pinch the bottom, and that will help you get those roots out all in one piece. Now that they're planted, I'm just going to come back in and just lightly water them in. This container grew zucchini and zinnias over the monsoon season, and now I'm going to refresh the soil just a little bit. I'll sprinkle in a little bit of fertilizer here, a little bit more soil here. It doesn't need a lot. I'm planting yarrow. The beneficial insects love this. It attracts so many different pollinators. Really has a long bloom time. Got several yarrow plants that actually survived this summer as well. So this is a favorite berries yarrow. So I'll add that mulch back on. We'll put it right up next to the plants until they get a little bit bigger. I planted some peppers in these 5-gallon buckets, and believe it or not, they survived the summer that we had. These containers are nice and deep. I added lots of holes to the bottom so that there's good drainage. Now that the season's changing, I can see that the soil level has gone down by several inches. So I definitely want to refresh these and add some more soil so they can keep growing. Just like with any container, what you're gonna wanna do is remove that mulch, and then add in a little bit of fertilizer. For the fertilizer that I'm using, it says about half a cup per 5 gallons of soil. Because these are 5-gallon containers, that makes it pretty easy for me. So in my beds, I'll typically top them with compost if they already have raised bed mix in them. But with containers, instead of just adding compost, I always will add raised bed mix because it has those good things we talked about, things like perlite and coconut coir mixed in with it that will provide extra water retention for the plants. So what I'm trying to do is to get this oya to come up just a little bit more. There we go. All right, now we're in business. So I pulled the oya up a little bit, carefully put this trellis back in place. Pepper branches are brittle, so they definitely could break. That looks like we got it. All right. Okay, so I've refreshed the soil in here. I've added some fertilizer, and now I'm gonna put that mulch back in place. You don't have to have an oya, but it just helps me out if I'm not able to water as often. I'm gonna fill that all the way up, and that excess water is gonna drain out of the bottom. Citrus grows really well in containers, but I won't grow it in anything smaller than a whiskey barrel. That means there's enough room for those roots to grow well. After about 3 years, you may start noticing that the citrus tree is getting bigger than the container. At that point, you have a couple of choices. You can either take the citrus out and plant it somewhere else in your landscape, or take the citrus out, trim down those roots, trim all over the citrus, and put it back in the container with fresh soil. This citrus is still pretty happy in this container, but next season I'm gonna need to pull this out and trim those roots. Citrus in container also needs more frequent fertilization than that in the ground. I like to use an organic fertilizer formulated for citrus to feed my citrus trees. If the soil level has gone down, pull the mulch back and fill it back up with potting mix or raised bed mix. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments if you're adding any containers to your garden this season. If you would like to learn more, consider joining Growing in the Garden Academy. I teach a live online course every month about seasonal topics, and members have access to recordings of all past classes. Academy members also receive my garden journal, what I'm planting, harvesting, and doing in my garden, delivered to their inbox every 2 weeks. I hope to see you there.